So, if you're like me and you consider yourself a car guy, then chances are you remember every time you picked up a controller and started a new racing games. A lot of times it's something as simple as inputting your name or watching an intro, but today I'm going to break down some of my favorite, or at least what I think are the most pivotal video games that led to me going down this path of becoming a car guy and how they have influenced me. I'm Billy, this is BILLT, let's get started.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 yo, go, go, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. To the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing shit my way, or the highway.
Hey guys, if you're new here, welcome to the channel. If not, welcome back. But I'm Billy and this is BILLT, and a few weeks ago I made a video about all the things that I felt catapulted me into becoming a car guy. So in this video, which if you haven't had a chance to see it, I'll put a link below, but in this video I talk about everything from movies to magazines, video games, car meets, buying my own car, hanging out with car friends, etc. But ultimately, during making that video, I decided that one of the most pivotal things for me was actually video games. Video games gave me a day-to-day interface and a more interactive way to become a car guy and interact with cars, especially before I was able to buy and drive a car myself. So in this video, I decided I would do my top 5 car racing games that influenced me. Well, I guess that's probably not necessarily true. Maybe we should call it my top 5 most influential racing games? Although these games are all for PlayStation 2, so maybe we'll go with my top 5 PlayStation 2 most influential car racing games to me. Yeah, I think that's good enough for me, so let's go ahead and get started with some of the honorable mentions. So real quick, I'm going to touch on a couple of games that I thought almost made the list, or at least are worth mentioning, but just didn't quite have what I was looking for with the rest of my list. And the first of those is the Midnight Club series. This was a series developed by Rockstar Games. They released 3-ish games for the PS2 era. I played most of them. I think I played all 3. I definitely played 1 and 2. It was a little too arcadey. It was a little too close to Grand Theft Auto, which I think people ended up just liking to drive around in Grand Theft Auto more than they liked playing these games. But I did play them, I did enjoy them. I was relatively young when they came out, so I did enjoy some of the unrealism. But I just didn't feel like they checked the boxes for this list, so they just didn't quite make it. The second game I'm going to quickly mention is the Juiced series. There was Juiced and Juiced 2, and they came out around the same time, a little bit later, but ultimately I felt like it was too far the other way, where they went all culture and no gameplay. Every time I tried to play it, I just didn't enjoy it. It was more about like trying to have like immersive culture without the racing gameplay. I don't really know what their angle was, but I definitely think they missed the mark. I don't think it's as close to the Midnight Club games to being on my list, but it is worth a mention because it was that same like mid 2000s to late 2000s era where the car culture was what it was, and they tried to really capitalize on the culture itself and not necessarily the gameplay. Now, I think there's actually no better place to start my list than what, in my opinion, is the game that started it all. So it's November 2003, about 5 months after Too Fast, Too Furious has come out, and there's nothing that I want more for Christmas. Of course, I'm talking about the original Need for Speed Underground. With what, in my opinion, at the time was the perfect blend of the arcade-style racer, which is fun to play, mixed with the culture that had been growing in the import tuner scene. This was, particularly at the time, probably the perfect racing game. That being said, despite the racing and the way I actually enjoyed playing the game, I probably beat the game in about 3 days, but with the linear gameplay and the limited cars and the fact that you could really only have one, I decided that this is actually not my number 5 game on the list. Of course, I'm talking about the sequel, Need for Speed Underground 2. I really look at these two games as two parts to the same game. The first game was very good, but I think the second one just took everything that the first game did well and expanded it. You have your open city map where it's maybe one of the first open world racing games. The story is solid. Everyone likes to play video games for the story no matter what they tell you, and I really think that this game, the second one, took everything the first one did and made it just a little bit better. So as for the story, like I said earlier, it really is just a continuation of the first game. So in fact, the beginning of career mode is just a recap of what happened in the first game and how we get to the second game. They did decide to move on from the poorly animated digital cutscenes to this more comic book story mode kind of storytelling, which I think works for the game. Obviously it's secondary because it's a racing game, but I do think that it does give you something kind of like a plot to follow, and it doesn't take away from the racing or the game itself. Now, as is customary, and you'll see this through the video, in most of these racing games, they give you an opportunity very early in the game to select your own vehicle, and most of these options are extremely minimalist. There are definitely some trends, and you will start to see a lot of the same cars being available as starter vehicles in a lot of these games, as they were the common starter cars for a lot of tuners in this era. I'm not going to get too much into gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, it's an open city map which allows you to find different areas like garages and shops and upgrade your car and all of the usual stuff that you usually get from racing games. If I went through every gameplay as deep as I wanted to, this would be a 2-hour video, and I don't think anyone wants that. So ultimately, Need for Speed Underground and Underground 2 did a great job of opening a lot of people's eyes to the culture and the cars and stuff like that, and the game itself had some pretty decent mechanics to get through it. So I do actually think that I have a bit of a tie at 5. I wasn't sure whether to put this game as an honorable mention or if I really truly did have it about the same as Need for Speed Underground 2 with the asterisk of Need for Speed Underground. So this really does kind of put 3 games at 5, but if Need for Speed Underground 2 is 5A, then I think this game would be 5B. So if you haven't had a chance to play it, this is a game called Street Racing Syndicate. Now, this game has very similar play to Need for Speed Underground. I think there's a little bit of a few differences. I think their tuning is a little bit more, I don't want to say in-depth, but a little bit more quantitative. You get the same kind of measurables and outputs. I just think they kind of dove in a little bit deeper on some of the things. There's a little bit more tunability. But ultimately, I think the gameplay is kind of about the same. I think there's one major difference between this game and Underground 2, and I'll get to that shortly. As for the story, you start off talking to this gentleman here with his GTR, and basically his buddy gets picked up by the cops, and he suggests that you race in his place. He mentions that you basically can't lose, and for this first race, you effectively can't because you're driving this R34. And basically, the driving mechanics of this game are very similar to Underground 2. I feel like the speed level feels a little slower. It feels a little bit more controllable. I don't necessarily know if that's better or worse, but it's just one of the few things that I noticed were a little bit different. After taking your cut of the winnings, you obviously get to go and pick your own starter vehicle, and again you see a familiar theme of there's some very entry-level options, of course leaning toward the heavy Japanese influence with a couple of other options. Of course, you will eventually have to make a decision based on what your cash available is, and you'll pick your car, get in it, and go ahead and start your open world adventure through this racing game. Now, I think the first stop for everybody should probably be heading to the shop where you can go ahead and tune your vehicle. Like I mentioned earlier, I felt like there was just like a slight extra level of granularity to the tuning on this game. Overall, it's not bad, and I don't necessarily dislike the one in Underground 2, but I just felt like there was just a little bit more to be offered in this one, and it kind of is like a preference. So go ahead and try out both games and let me know what you think. Now, despite the dynamics being relatively the same between Underground 2 and this game, there's a few major differences with how the races are carried out. Now, each race has both an ante where you need to join, and it also gives you an opportunity to wager with each racer and an opportunity to make a little bit of money with a side bet. So, the other thing that I want to mention, which is a pretty big step away from what Underground does, is that this game does have damage. So, between having to put up money to be in a race and possibly betting with other racers within the race, and then on top of all that, the availability of damage, which will cost you money to repair in the long run, there is a high probability that if you don't race very well, or while you're still learning, or maybe if you get, out over your skis a little bit, you could effectively run out of money. Now, I haven't played this game in a long time, and I'm going to jump back into it, but there is a legitimate possibility that you go broke, and that you don't have enough money to either repair your car or enter another race or effectively sustain playing. One of the other main differences between Underground 2 and this game is the presence of police. Now, when you're driving around in the open world, there is a high probability that you might pass a police officer, and if you're breaking some rules, they might be more than interested. Now, if I haven't mentioned it already, this game does go a little deeper into the culture than Underground 2 does, and one of the very big differences, which I actually almost feel at this point is a little bit of a detractor from this game, is that they decided to add girlfriends. Now, it kind of feels ridiculous even just saying it out loud right now, but basically you can drive around and have opportunities to pick up women. During the game, they will give you a challenge to complete, and if you are successful, they will consider being your girlfriend.
Whoa, that was awesome! Maybe you and me could hook up, yeah? Cool!
You can then venture back to your warehouse where you store cars as well as have your opportunities to hook up with your girlfriend, which just feels weird saying out loud. And by this, ultimately in the game, they give you an opportunity with each of these models to unlock different videos of them dancing. So I ultimately think that whether you want to cruise the streets or find some races or even just modify cars, particularly going back to this particular era, I think you get really a very similar feel from both of these games, and that's why I have them kind of tied at 5. And they also came out within about 6 months of each other, so they're pretty contemporary. They kind of have the same style and feel, and ultimately I think that if you played either one, and even if you played both, I think you would enjoy either one of them. So go ahead and let me know in the comments if you want to see me maybe do more of a playthrough through either one of these games, or maybe a bigger comparison between these two particular games, because they ultimately came out around the same time, and I think they have a very similar feel. So it's probably sometime in the mid-2000s, and I'm rummaging around in a GameStop bargain bin, and I find the game that will probably change my perspective on racing video games forever. Now, this is a relatively low-budget, relatively unknown video game from Japan that predominantly features highway racing, somewhat based on a very important to me anime series that I can get into more later. But basically, I found this game and had no idea what it was, but was instantly enthralled and instantly had to play it all the time. So this game initially came out in 2001, but I probably didn't stumble on it until probably when I was in the midst of playing the previous 3 games that we've talked about, so probably 03, 04, if not 05. I don't know the exact time when I picked up the game, but I know it had already been around for a few years, and like I said, I definitely picked it up for about $10 at a GameStop. This game is Tokyo Extreme Racer 0. So this game offered you a ton of vehicles, but none of them are licensed, although it's fairly obvious what they are. Obviously, most of them are Japanese. There are a few other vehicles sprinkled in, but this does give you a highway operation where you're driving around a particular highway in Tokyo. None of it's licensed, but it is a very enjoyable game. But for that reason, this is actually not my pick at number 4. And once again, we won't have to stray far from my initial choice to what my actual choice is. Not only is this one of my favorite games, but it is also one of my favorite intros to a video game in the racing genre. So I guess if you haven't guessed by now, then this game is Tokyo Extreme Racer 3. This game offers a simplicity and artistry that you would come to expect from a Japanese video game that is not propelled by a large budget. In its feudal Japanese-styled storyline, the game really portrays that there is one goal the entire time, and that is to be the fastest. Unlike the earlier game in this series, they did expand the realms to 3 different areas in Japan. They did also secure licensing for many of the Japanese vehicles, as well as some of the other vehicles that are in the game, and much like any other racing game, you do get to start with a fairly pedestrian vehicle, but at the same time it's a good entry level, and there's definitely a theme here where you kind of start seeing the same cars over and over again. Not to name any names, but one of my biggest gripes with this game is that one of the major Japanese auto manufacturers is notably absent. Once you've selected a vehicle, it's time to enter the highways of Japan by selecting your region and then beginning your conquest. So before hitting the highway, the first thing I always do is hit the tuning shop. This is where you upgrade your car. Now, the upgrades themselves are abstracted. It's a leveling system. It's more quality over quantity. You're not looking at necessarily just the brake horsepower, but ultimately level 3 is better than level 2. You want your weight down, power up, suspension upgradable. The real thing is getting the car upgraded so that you can actually go into the tuning for the settings. Now, the settings on this game I think are actually super important. As you get further in the game, they become more important. I think in the beginning of the game, it's really just getting your power up and your weight down and getting used to the controls. So once you're happy with where your car is at, and like I said early in the game, there's not a lot of settings to do, but once you're happy with the car, it's time to go ahead and select a course. Now in this case, we are in Tokyo. As you'll see here, there is a little bit of story, and like I said earlier, there's this kind of feudal hierarchy setup where the fastest is at the top, and you kind of have to work your way up. But ultimately, the gameplay is a little bit repetitive, and I'll get a little bit more into that in a minute. But there is enough story to kind of keep the game flowing and keep you moving, and there are some quote-unquote characters that will start to appear, and if you've played Zero, then you'll know that. A lot of them do get called back for this third version of the game, and ultimately, let's go ahead and get into the racing. Now, the racing is more of a battle system where you have a spirit meter, which you'll see here up at the top, and basically that spirit meter will go down as you either hit walls or hit traffic, or if you fall behind. Now, similar to like a battle game where you're trying to drive the opponent's HP down to 0, it's the same thing here. So what you're going to want to do is you want to get in front, and you're going to want to basically put as much gap between them and yourself as possible, which will push their spirit meter down as fast as you can. Now, whoever gets to 0 first loses, and ultimately, this is the whole gameplay. There is a few Achilles heels of this game, and one of it is the repetitiveness of it. So if you're not interested in this type of gameplay, it's really not going to be a game for you. It is super repetitive. It is like kind of like a one-trick pony. Like, it only does one thing. I think it does it particularly well, and I happen to like the culture behind it. But at the same time, I do openly admit that this is a very repetitive game with minimal story. I do like the car list, and I do like the tunability of the vehicles. I think that is actually a really cool part of this game. But at the same time, especially early in the game, it's a very grindy game. It's like doing the same thing over and over again, getting the same results even sometimes, where maybe your car is not quite fast enough, or maybe you're just, you're not handling it well, or you can't get the settings dialed in right. Which, like I said, as you get further in the game, becomes more of a necessity, is getting the car just set up right. Because every little thing that you hit, every little split second, getting in front of the other player, like all of that stuff is very important because the game is so repetitive. Now, I don't know anybody who was playing video games at the time that this video game came out and into cars and didn't play this game. This was sim racing before sim racing was a thing, and this was maybe one of the most complete racing games that, in my opinion, may have ever existed until we've gotten into some of our current setups with, all these simulations, whether it's Assetto Corsa or whatever. This was maybe, at the time, 20 years ago, the most complete game for racing that you could possibly play. And of course, this game is Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. Now, gameplay offers you a lot of what sim racing offers you now, which is competitive play as well as kind of like a arcade versus your friends. Now, the main simulation mode screen offers you a lot of different options, but I actually think that one of the best places to start is the License Center. Now, the License Center is kind of just a way to kind of stage the different levels of the game, and you obviously can't participate in certain races without the right license, but the licenses will actually kind of allow you to learn how to operate and play the game before you buy your first car, before you do your first race. There really isn't a ton of like training otherwise. It kind of just throws you straight into the game. Now, the added benefit is if you can successfully complete all these licensing exams with gold, which is the highest level to break, then you actually do unlock a car. It's been a while since I played this game, so I'm a little rusty and I've not been able to unlock all of these at gold, but completing these did kind of set me up to be ready for the first race and getting my first car. Well, despite not being able to complete them all at gold, I was able to finish everything at least bronze, some of them silver, whatever. But either way, I got my B license, and that meant that I felt like I was ready to go ahead and buy my first car and start my first race. Although this is not a requirement, you can go straight to buying a car the second you turn the game on. So the car list for this game is relatively exhaustive. There's hundreds of cars from all different makes and all different countries, but you will probably see a similar format where you can only afford certain cars. Now, there's certain cars that I would love to start with, but I think when I think about it, it really always comes down to one particular car that I seem to use almost right away in many of the games that I play. So once you pick a car, there's plenty of things to choose from the GT Auto, which is basically like car wash and wheels and oil changes, to obviously the tuning shop. So there's a bunch of different things you can do to get yourself ready to race, but once you feel like you're ready, go ahead and jump in a race, and that's really where everything starts. So the racing in this game, or at least in this mode, are set up into a couple different categories, starting with beginners to amateurs, professional, etc. That's where things like licenses and everything will come in, but each race will have its own set of entry requirements and restrictions, but usually there's a good set of beginner races where you can kind of just jump in and go. So of course this is a sim style racer, so it's a little less arcade like some of the other games that have been on this list so far, and really this is the only sim game that I have on this list. Now I'm gonna go into Gran Turismo 4 a little bit, but I also I feel like 3 was so much more influential, particularly for me, just based on timing and where I was at when the game came out and how often I played it. I mean, I probably played this game for hundreds of hours when I was younger, and I think I might jump back into it just for nostalgia, but I haven't decided yet. So go ahead and let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me do some more playthroughs or anything like that on any of the games I've talked about so far, or this game in particular. So as I said earlier, this is a very simulation style, which is much closer to real racing than the arcadey stuff that we've talked about so far. And that being said, you do get a chance to win money every time you win a race, and these first couple of races are fairly straightforward. It's not a series, it's just a couple of individual events, so every time you win, you'll get a little bit of money, and then you get to move on to the next race. Now, the races in the beginning are fairly straightforward. It's usually the simpler tracks with lighter competition, and it's really about learning the game. And like I said, there's really anywhere that you wish to go as far as simulation racing goes. Back in the early 2000s, this was the game to do it, whether it was rally, whether it was endurance races. As you get deeper into the game, you can start unlocking those types of games, but initially you're just going to be doing some of these quick, simple races, a couple laps. Should take you a few minutes for each lap, and you should be done with each race in several minutes. So one other feature of this game is that when you complete a series, there are additional bonuses. So as I mentioned, you get prize money for each race or each series that you complete, but on top of that, each series, like in this case, the 3 races that are part of this beginner cup, if you complete all 3 of them with a first place finish, you will actually get a bonus reward, which in this case is a vehicle. In some cases, that's actually the only way to get certain vehicles, is to complete certain races or certain series, and in that case, you'll unlock whatever it is you're trying to get. Now, I said I would talk about Gran Turismo 4, and I'm just going to kind of lump it in as like a subheading for Gran Turismo 3. And I don't have any problems with the game. It's a perfectly fine game. I think they took a lot of what Gran Turismo 3 was and just rolled it into 4. And there's some upgraded graphics and stuff like that, but ultimately, I don't have the same connection to it. And I feel like Gran Turismo 3, for me, given my age and when I played it, was just much more enforcing of making me interested in cars and stuff like that. I think I was more in my quote-unquote formative years, and I think I feel much more closely connected to Gran Turismo 3, and there's really not much for me to say about Gran Turismo 4 that I can't say about Gran Turismo 3. Aside from this ridiculously artistic intro, as well as some changes to just graphically how you enter events and buy cars and stuff like that, they kind of made it a little bit more open-ended, but at the same time, it's roughly the same game. It's a simulation-style game. I'm not going to go into every Gran Turismo game, just like I'm not going to go into every Need for Speed game. And it is one of those things where I just don't think that for the sake of this vehicle that I have to go into in depth beyond what I've already said about Gran Turismo 3 for Gran Turismo 4. Need for Speed Most Wanted may be one of the most iconic Need for Speed games. It definitely sold a whole bunch. But I just never really fell in love with it, and that's why it's not the number 2 game on my list. I did love that to some extent Need for Speed did get back to their roots and re-added police to the mix, and this game was entirely during what most people would consider to be the golden hour and not at night like Underground or Underground 2. That being said, they effectively made a sequel to Need for Speed Most Wanted, and they called it Need for Speed Carbon. In fact, the beginning of Need for Speed Carbon is effectively the end of Need for Speed Most Wanted, and even starts with a cutscene that is a flashback to the same character that will eventually become the main character in Need for Speed Most Wanted, as well as Carbon.
Start up.
Don't disappoint.
You'll notice that much like Need for Speed Most Wanted, Need for Speed Carbon went back to the semi-lifelike, where it looks like they kind of just digitalized an actual actor completing some of these cutscenes instead of the comic book that they used in Need for Speed Underground 2. This opening cutscene for Carbon basically serves as kind of like a background story for the main character of Most Wanted and how they got there, and basically like an origin story, if you will, which I think story is relatively important. I think people lose the plot of the game if they don't have something to follow, so I do think that there is something to be said for having a decent story to follow, but ultimately the gameplay of this game is much better than I think even Most Wanted or Need for Speed Underground 2 provided. I think in some ways it actually takes both of those games and combines them into one.
Look, between the heat and the cruise, you need to walk away. Take my car. Go, get out of here.
So once the flashback kind of concludes, you find yourself back in quote-unquote present day in your BMW, the one that is most notably from Most Wanted, and you'll find yourself re-encountering some familiar faces as well as getting yourself into the main gameplay of this game.
Hey, get back.
Everything comes to a screeching halt as you're plummeting down the mountain as you run into a truck and total the BMW, re-encountering your buddy Cross from Most Wanted.
Sit down. How you been? It's time to settle a little score from Rockport.
I could let you watch the whole introduction, but I think you'll just have to play the game for yourself if you want to see it again. So you will find yourself eventually in a very familiar car selection window where in this case you really only have three options, and it's the three classes of muscle, exotic, and tuner car that this game's cars are divided into. Carbon, in my opinion, did really well to blend what Underground 2 did well as what Most Wanted did well. Most notably, they've re-added the police element that was missing in Underground 2 and was prevalent in Most Wanted, while maintaining a lot of the ideology and gameplay that made Underground 2 so good. Now the game is still an open map game and the racing is still relatively the same, but they've added some elements that have kind of changed the way the game is played. Now you do have a crew and you do have different abilities of each crew member and you can assign them for each race. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the mechanics of the game, but it was just something that I felt was a nice touch that they could add some wrinkle to kind of make the game a little bit different. Now, in the vein of creating a crew, they did also add the wrinkle that it is now more of like a conquest game where you're trying to take over territories by winning races, and they'll explain it a little bit more here.
This whole city's a battleground. All the crews are always fighting over territories. Just check with your map if you want to see what's going on. The minor crews push and pull, but you'll see that most of Palmont City is divided up between Kenji's Bushido, Wolf's TFK, and Angie's 21st Street crew. Your rep? Okay, you have no rep, but you win a few races and you'll end up owning an area, and that's what'll build up your rep. Once the crew bosses see you as a threat, they'll probably come looking for you. If they challenge you, then you got a shot at taking over their turf.
And this, of course, is where the canyon comes in, and if you do have a shot at taking over territory from a crew boss, you will have to race them in the canyon, very Tokyo Drift style at the end of the movie. Which, of course, you guessed it, is exactly where you encounter Cross in the very beginning of the game. Ultimately, this game ended up having some of my favorite gameplay from all of the Need for Speed, Underground, or Most Wanted, or any of even the original ones. This is some of the best gameplay that I've had in a racing game, period, but that really just leaves my number one pick. Now this is another one of those super artistic intros, and if you guessed it or if you had it on your bingo sheet that it's another Tokyo Extreme Racer game, then you got it. This is it. It's Tokyo Extreme Racer Drift 2. It's one of my favorite games to play. It captures everything from the original Tokyo Extreme Racer games, but it gives you a lot more variability in how you actually can play the game. It is a little repetitive, but at the same time you get different courses and different cars, and the car list is great. I really don't have any complaints about this game except for the fact that it was made roughly 20 years ago and that I think they should bring it back. Other than that, I think it's one of my still probably favorite games to play, even though, like I said, it's 20 years old. But it captures every little bit of gameplay that I would want from a racing game, and then some, and even some stuff that I didn't know I wanted. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the gameplay, but let's go ahead and finish up this super artistic intro. So the gameplay for this game is going to start off with a brief explanation of what this quote-unquote Kaido circuit is and how it works in Japan, and basically that the game is broken down into both daytime and nighttime, which honestly it almost gives you a feel of like two separate games. Now you start in the daytime, and the daytime is kind of your like sanctioned competition, and first off you have to go ahead and buy a car. Now, like I've said earlier in this video many times, you're gonna see a lot of similarities of like what is available to you. You're either limited by money or just not having that many options for cars or something like that, but you will start to see, once again, kind of a, okay, you started this entry-level car and you have to work your way up. In this particular game, they do limit you by giving you a certain amount of credits, and unfortunately you can't just buy whatever you want, but they do offer you a quote-unquote used car dealership, which I always think is always a cool option to like buy cars that already have some mileage on them and you get a discounted price, especially when you're limited by the amount of funds that you have. So one of the cool things that they added to this game is sponsorships. Since you are racing during the day, that these category races are basically like sanctioned race events similar to what you would see in Gran Turismo, there are sponsors. Now, in order to get a sponsor, you do have to complete a sponsor race, which is basically them testing you to see if you're a good enough driver for them to sponsor you, and if you can complete one of those, you will unlock a sponsor. So unlike the Tokyo Extreme Racers of the past where you're racing on the highway, and I guess the exception of the original Drift game, you are now racing on mountain roads. So it's a very different feel, although you do still see the prevalent SP system when you are doing a head-to-head race. But here you're racing on mountain roads and not highways. There's no traffic, but you do have guardrails and things like that where you can hit it and you can lose SP. In this particular case, you're racing for a sponsor, so you're really just trying to do the time attack while beating your opponent. And from there, if you win the sponsor, you will get access to their stickers. So once you have unlocked a sponsor, you will get access to what they call Sticker Tune, and basically what that is that allows you to apply stickers to your car. Now, by applying stickers to your car, each location has a different value where you can apply different stickers for different values, and what that does is when you race during the day in these sanctioned competitions, that basically you will get extra money based on what your sponsors are. So you can see the point totals. Basically each race I'll get 10,000 CP for this particular sticker being applied as, in this case, a windscreen banner. Each location has a different point value, so you want to put your biggest sponsors in your biggest locations. So of course there is always your standard tuning shop where you can do your power adders and modify your car and make it faster. One of the things I think they did with this one that made it interesting was they kind of have this more intricate tuning setup where you can pick different companies, which I think probably are inspired by real life companies, but what they've done is they've created 6 different companies, or 5, I can't remember how many it is, but at the same time you can mix and match and see how many of these different parts fit on the car and basically watch your power go up or down or otherwise. And there's a little bit more variability than just selecting the highest level, like, oh, I'm just going to go straight to level 2 or level 3. There is a little bit of a mix and match component to kind of get the most bang for your buck. Now, if you go into the tuning, there is a little blurb where they do explain how the tuning works. And I don't want to give like a whole like DIY, but at the same time, like, if you're really interested, go and play the game and you'll see what I'm talking about. So once you're happy with your car, or at least if you run out of funds, I think it's time to go ahead and jump into some races. Now, once you select a course, it'll give you a bunch of options, and each time you select a new course, you kind of get like this little bit of a kind of an artistic preview of the course itself. And all of these courses are based on real locations in Japan, so it's actually kind of a cool thing. This is, in my opinion, like street racing games like Need for Speed Underground or Carbon or any of those other games meets Gran Turismo, and it's kind of somewhere in between where you have some extreme realism mixed with a little bit of an arcade feel. So aside from these sanctioned category races, there is another option that you can do, and it's called Gymkhana, and most people are familiar with the term Gymkhana from what Ken Block and Hunicorn started, as well as Travis Pastrana, etc. And Gymkhana is really just a Japanese style of training, and basically what this does is it sets up like a little micro course with cones, and you kind of get to learn how to either execute maneuvers or handle your car, and if you can pass these, it's actually a great way to generate money, as well as get a better grip of how the game works or how your car is handling, etc. So these are things that you can do at each course, and they are relatively repetitive, but it is just another wrinkle that they added to this game. So one of the other things you'll notice in the category style racing is that there's 2 types. There's TA and CA. So CA is more of like a drift event. I'm pretty sure it stands for control attack, but I'm not 100% sure. It's more of a drift event or a slide event where you're basically going to go through corners and get points based on how you control the car, where TA or time attack is going to be more of like hitting a best time on like a hill climb, etc. And basically it's just 2 different ways to run the same route in maybe even the same car and just kind of get a different feel, where one is more for style and one is more for time. But either way, it gives you a little bit of variability in a game that's otherwise kind of repetitive. Once you've had enough fun during the day, it's time to transition into night mode. Now, night mode is more of what we came to expect from the old Tokyo Extreme Racer games, where you're more rival based. So they do give you a quick rundown of how you get to go to parking areas, and that each stage has a boss and they're called slashers, and they'll message you and you have to respond for them to show up and race you. But ultimately the racing is effectively the same, just with the SP kind of spirit bar that we mentioned in the other Tokyo Extreme Racer games. To challenge your rivals, simply show up to the parking area, find them, and you'll have an option to go battle. Now, after a few races, you'll kind of get the gist of it. It really isn't anything complicated, and like I said, racing games are inherently repetitive, but I think this one finds new and exciting ways to kind of do the same thing a little bit different. But don't take my word for it, you just might have to try it for yourself. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching this far. I know it's about 50 minutes in right now, and that's about 30 minutes more than I anticipated, but I just had so much to say about each one of these titles, and I appreciate everyone watching it. So, other than that, I just want to leave on a couple of different notes. One is Tokyo Extreme Racer, the original, like 0 and 3, and the way that they're running there. They have re-released on Steam. If you watched my other video, I mentioned it. It's also on PlayStation, just came out, so I'll be playing that. If you want to see gameplay from that, or if you want to see more gameplay from any of the other games on here, or if you just want to let me know that I was wrong and that Need for Speed Most Wanted is the best game of all time and that I was stupid for putting it on my list just as an intro for Carbon, then yeah, drop me a comment. But don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.